There I was, sitting on that cold park bench at 3 a.m., with nothing but a torn suitcase and the clothes on my back. At 73 years old, after giving everything to my children, I had been thrown out like yesterday's garbage. But what happened next? What God did in that darkest moment? It changed everything I thought I knew about His love. Dad, we can't take care of you anymore. You're too much of a burden. Those words from my own son still echo in my ears, but little did I know that rejection from my family was about to become the greatest blessing of my life. Sometimes, my friends, God has to close every human door so we can finally see the one He's been holding open all along. My name is Samuel, and I'm here today to share a story that I've kept in my heart for 5 years now. A story about how the deepest rejection can become the doorway to the most beautiful acceptance. About how God's family is sometimes more real than the one we're born into. If you're feeling abandoned, forgotten, or worthless today, please stay with me, because what the Lord did in my life, He can do in yours too. Hello, dear friends. I want to thank Pastor Mike for allowing me to share my testimony on this beautiful channel that brings hope to so many hearts. What I'm about to tell you might shake you to your core, but it will also show you the incredible magnitude of our Father's love. It's a story of human cruelty, but more importantly of divine mercy. A story that proves that when man rejects us, God accepts us with arms wide open. I spent 45 years building what I thought was a perfect family. I worked 3 jobs to put my children through college, sacrificed my dreams so they could achieve theirs, and gave them everything I had. I thought I was building a legacy of love. I had no idea I was building my own prison. But God, oh, how God had other plans. Plans to show me that His love is not conditional like human love. Plans to teach me that being chosen by Him is worth more than being accepted by anyone else. Plans to prove that He is a father to the fatherless, even when you're 73 years old and feel like you have nothing left to give. So settle in, dear friends, because this journey will take you through the valley of rejection and up to the mountain of divine acceptance. It will show you that sometimes our greatest pain becomes our greatest testimony. And if you're watching this and feeling like nobody wants you, I want you to know right now, you are wanted, you are loved, and you are chosen by the King of Kings. Let me start from the beginning when life seemed perfect, and I thought I had it all figured out. I was born in a small farming town in Tennessee, the youngest of 6 children. My parents were hard-working folks who taught us that family comes first, always. That lesson shaped everything I did for the next 70 years of my life. I married my high school sweetheart, Martha, when I was 22, and we were blessed with 4 children, Michael, Sarah, David, and little Rebecca. Those were the golden years. Every Sunday after church, our house would fill with the smell of Martha's famous pot roast, and the sound of our children's laughter would echo through every room. I worked at the local factory during the day, did carpentry work in the evenings, and on weekends I'd fix cars for extra money. Every penny went toward making sure our kids had opportunities we never had. Martha and I had dreams, you know. We talked about traveling when the kids grew up, maybe visiting the Holy Land, seeing where Jesus walked. We saved a little money here and there, tucked it away in an old coffee can behind the flour in our pantry. Our adventure fund, Martha called it. But somehow that money always ended up going to school supplies or Michael's football equipment or Sarah's piano lessons. Looking back now, I can see that we were pouring everything into our children, expecting that love to come back to us someday. We thought we were planting seeds of gratitude, but we were actually teaching them that our worth was measured by what we could give them. The children excelled in school. Michael got a full scholarship to study business, Sarah became a nurse, David went into law, and Rebecca pursued marketing. We were so proud. At every graduation, Martha and I would sit in the back row, tears streaming down our faces, knowing that all those years of sacrifice had been worth it. But here's what nobody tells you about sacrifice. Sometimes the people you sacrifice for start to see it as their right, not your gift. After the kids graduated and moved away, Martha and I finally had time for each other again. We were planning that trip to Israel, finally going to dip our funds from that old coffee can. Martha had already bought guidebooks and was learning basic Hebrew phrases. She was so excited, writing in her journal every night about all the places we were going to visit. Then came the phone call that changed everything. Martha had gone to the doctor for her annual checkup. Just routine, she said, but the doctor found something in her blood work, something that shouldn't have been there. Leukemia. Stage 3. The word hit our living room like a lightning bolt, shattering all our dreams of golden years and Holy Land adventures in one devastating moment. I'll never forget Martha's face when she told me. She was sitting in her favorite rocking chair, the one where she used to nurse all our babies, and she looked so small, so fragile. "Samuel," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "the doctor says we need to act fast. That coffee can get emptied real quick. Hospital bills, treatments, experimental drugs, everything we had saved for our dreams went to fighting for Martha's life. And I didn't regret a single penny. I would have given everything twice over to see her smile again. The children came to visit, of course. They were concerned, supportive at first. But as months turned into years and Martha's condition worsened, I started noticing changes. The visits became shorter, the phone calls less frequent. They all had their own lives, their own families, their own problems. Michael was building his business empire. Sarah had 3 young children and a demanding nursing job. David was working 80 hours a week at his law firm. Rebecca was climbing the corporate ladder in New York. They were all so busy being successful with the opportunities we had given them. Martha fought for 3 years, 3 long, painful, expensive years. I held her hand through every chemotherapy session, slept in hospital chairs more nights than I can count, and watched the strongest woman I knew slowly fade away like a sunset. She passed on a Tuesday morning in March. I was holding her hand when she took her last breath, and her final words to me were, "Take care of the children, Samuel. They're going to need you more than they know." Even at the end, she was thinking about them. Even when they had barely visited in her final months, she was worried about their well-being. That was Martha, always putting family first, no matter what. The funeral was well attended. All our children came, of course, with their spouses and kids. They gave beautiful eulogies about what a wonderful mother Martha had been. They thanked me for taking such good care of her. For a moment, I felt like we were a family again. But then came the conversations about practical matters. "Dad, this house is too big for you now," Michael said as we stood in the kitchen where Martha had made thousands of meals for our family. "You should think about selling it and moving somewhere smaller." "We're worried about you living alone," Sarah added, though I noticed she didn't offer an alternative. David, always the lawyer, was more direct. "Dad, let's talk numbers. What did Mom's treatment cost? What's left in your savings? We need to know where you stand financially." Rebecca, my baby girl, the one I used to carry on my shoulders, looked around the house like she was appraising it. "This place could sell for good money in today's market," she said. "You could probably buy a nice little apartment somewhere." They meant well, I told myself. They were just concerned about their old dad. They wanted to make sure I was taken care of. But something about those conversations felt cold, calculating, like they were solving a problem rather than caring for their father. I decided to stay in the house. It was paid for, thanks to 40 years of mortgage payments, and every room held memories of Martha that I wasn't ready to let go of. The children seemed disappointed by my decision, but they didn't push it, at least not at first. The first year after Martha's death was the loneliest of my life. I'd wake up every morning expecting to hear her humming in the kitchen, only to remember that the silence was permanent now. I tried to stay busy. I tended to her garden, kept the house exactly as she had left it, and waited for my children to call. They did call occasionally, usually when they needed something. Michael called when his business was struggling and he needed a loan. Sarah called when she and her husband were having marriage problems and needed someone to watch the kids. David called when he was stressed about a big case and needed to vent. Rebecca called when she was between apartments and needed a place to crash for a few weeks. I said yes to everything. I gave Michael $10,000 from Martha's life insurance money. I watched Sarah's children for 2 weeks while she and her husband went to counseling. I listened to David's work problems for hours on the phone. I let Rebecca stay in her old room and do her laundry for free. But here's what I noticed. They only called when they needed something. Nobody called just to check on me. Nobody asked how I was handling the grief, or if I was eating well, or if the house felt too empty. I was their solution center, not their father. The second year was harder. My arthritis was getting worse, making it difficult to maintain the house the way Martha would have liked. I started having dizzy spells, and my doctor said my blood pressure was dangerously high. When I mentioned these things to my children, they'd make sympathetic sounds and promise to visit soon. But soon never seemed to come. Michael was too busy expanding his business. Sarah was dealing with her own family drama. David had made partner at his law firm and was working even longer hours. Rebecca had gotten engaged and was planning an elaborate wedding that somehow I wasn't involved in organizing, despite paying for a significant portion of it. I started going to church more regularly, partly because I missed Martha and felt closer to her there, but mostly because I was lonely. Pastor Williams and his wife Eleanor were kind to me. They'd invite me for Sunday dinner occasionally, and Eleanor would always send me home with leftovers and a warm hug. "Samuel," Pastor Williams said to me one Sunday after service, "you know the church family is here for you, don't you? We're not just Sunday acquaintances. We're brothers and sisters in Christ." I appreciated his words, but I still believed that blood family came first. That's what I had been taught, and that's what I had lived by for 70 years. I kept waiting for my children to step up, to show the same care and concern I had shown them their entire lives. The third year brought new challenges. I had a minor heart attack in the middle of the night and had to call 911 myself. When I called Michael from the hospital, he sounded annoyed that I had woken him up. He said he'd try to come visit that weekend, but Friday afternoon he called to say something had come up at work. Sarah came to the hospital, but spent most of the visit talking on her phone about her own problems. David sent flowers with a card that said, "Get well soon, Dad," but didn't visit at all. Rebecca was too busy with wedding planning to make the 3-hour drive. Lying in that hospital bed, connected to machines and surrounded by strangers, I started to see the truth I had been avoiding. My children had moved on with their lives, and I wasn't really part of them anymore. I was a responsibility they checked off their lists, not a person they cherished. When I got home from the hospital, the house felt bigger and emptier than ever. Martha's garden was overgrown because I hadn't been able to tend it properly. The gutters needed cleaning. The front porch steps were sagging and the paint was peeling in several places. At 73, with a weak heart and arthritic hands, these tasks felt impossible. That's when Michael made his suggestion. "Dad, I've been thinking," he said during one of his rare phone calls. "That house is becoming a burden for you. You're not able to maintain it properly, and it's not safe for you to be living alone after your heart attack." "I'm managing just fine," I protested, though we both knew it wasn't entirely true. "Look, I found this great assisted living facility about an hour from here. It's clean, safe, and they have medical staff on site 24/7. You'd have your own apartment, but with help when you need it." An assisted living facility. The words hit me like a physical blow. In my generation, those places were where you went to die, where families put their elderly relatives when they became inconvenient. "Son, I'm not ready for that," I said. "This is my home. Your mother and I built our life here. I can hire someone to help with the maintenance if needed." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Michael sighed, the way he used to when he was frustrated with me as a teenager. "Dad, be practical. You're sitting on a gold mine with that house. The real estate market is hot right now. You could sell it, pay for the assisted living facility, and still have money left over. It makes financial sense." Financial sense. Not emotional sense, not what would make me happy, not what would honor Martha's memory. Financial sense. "Let me think about it," I said, though I had no intention of seriously considering it. But the pressure didn't stop there. Over the next few months, all 4 children started working on me. Sarah would call and tell me horror stories about elderly people who had fallen and weren't found for days. David would send me articles about the legal liability of maintaining property at my age. Rebecca would describe the lovely community aspect of assisted living facilities, how I'd make new friends and stay active. They presented it as concern for my well-being, but I could hear the underlying message: "You're becoming a problem that needs to be solved." The breaking point came on what should have been a joyful occasion, Rebecca's wedding. I had given her $15,000 toward the wedding, money that came from selling Martha's jewelry and some furniture. I bought a new suit, got my hair cut, and drove 3 hours to the venue, excited to walk my baby girl down the aisle since her mother couldn't be there. But when I arrived at the church, Rebecca pulled me aside with a strained smile. "Dad, there's been a small change in plans. Jason's father is going to walk me down the aisle. He's been more involved in the wedding planning, and we thought, well, it just makes more sense." Jason's father, a man who had known Rebecca for 2 years, was going to walk her down the aisle instead of the father who had raised her, supported her, and paid for her education and her wedding. I sat in the 3rd row during the ceremony, watching a stranger fulfill what should have been my honor. The pain in my chest wasn't from my heart condition, it was from my heart breaking. At the reception, I was seated at a table with distant relatives I barely knew. My children were all at the head table with the wedding party. When Rebecca threw her bouquet, she threw it in the opposite direction from where I was standing. When she danced with Jason's father during the father-daughter dance, I excused myself to the bathroom and cried like a baby. That night, driving home alone on dark highways, I finally admitted the truth to myself. My children were ashamed of me. I was the old widowed father who didn't fit into their successful modern lives. I was a reminder of their humble beginnings, an embarrassment they tolerated out of obligation. When I got home, I sat in Martha's rocking chair and talked to her like she was still there. "Martha, honey, I don't know what to do. The children we raised, the ones we sacrificed everything for, they don't want me anymore. They see me as a burden, not a blessing." I could almost hear her voice saying, "Samuel, sometimes the family God gives us isn't the one we're born into." But I wasn't ready to hear that message yet. I was still clinging to the hope that my children would remember who they were, would remember the values Martha and I had tried to instill in them. 6 months after the wedding, Michael called with news that would shatter what was left of my world. "Dad, we need to talk, all of us. Can you drive over to my house this Saturday? Sarah, David, and Rebecca will be there too." Something in his tone made my blood run cold, but I agreed. Maybe they had finally realized how they'd been treating me. Maybe they wanted to make things right. I should have known better. Saturday morning, I put on my best shirt and drove to Michael's suburban mansion, the one I had helped him buy with a down payment loan 5 years earlier. All 4 of my children were waiting in his formal living room, sitting across from an empty chair that was obviously meant for me. It felt like a trial. I was the defendant, and they were the jury. Michael took the lead, as he always did. "Dad, we've been talking, and we're all concerned about you. Your health is declining, the house is too much for you, and you're becoming increasingly isolated." "We love you, Dad," Sarah chimed in, though her voice sounded rehearsed. "But we have our own families to think about now." David, ever the lawyer, had paperwork ready. "We've found an excellent facility, full medical care, activities, meals provided. It's really the best option for everyone involved." Rebecca, my baby girl, wouldn't even look me in the eye. "Dad, you'll be happier there. You'll make new friends. You won't be so lonely." I looked at these 4 people I had raised, educated, and loved unconditionally, and I realized they had become strangers. When had they become so cold? When had they started talking about me like I was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved? "What if I don't want to go?" I asked quietly. The silence in the room was deafening. Then Michael cleared his throat. "Dad, you don't really have a choice. None of us can take you in. We all have our own responsibilities, our own families to consider. This is the best we can do." The best they could do. 4 successful adults, all of whom I had put through college, all of whom owned beautiful homes with spare bedrooms, and the best they could do was dump their father in an institution. "You want me to sell the house," I said. It wasn't a question. "The proceeds will pay for your care," David said, sliding papers across the coffee table. "We've already spoken to a real estate agent. The market is perfect right now." I stared at those papers, legal documents that would strip away everything Martha and I had built together, our home, our memories, our life's work, reduced to numbers on a balance sheet. "I need time to think about this," I said, standing up to leave. "Dad?" Michael's voice had an edge to it now. "This isn't really a request. We've already put a deposit down on the facility. You move in next month." Next month. They had already decided my future without consulting me. I was 73 years old, and my own children were treating me like I was incompetent. I walked out of that house without saying another word. As I drove home, I kept waiting for one of them to call, to apologize, to tell me they had made a mistake. The phone never rang. That night, I sat in the house that Martha and I had called home for 40 years, and I made a decision that surprised even me. I wasn't going quietly into their convenient solution. If they wanted me out of my own home, they were going to have to face what they were doing. I called Michael the next morning. "Son, I've thought about what you all said yesterday, and my answer is no. I'm not selling this house, and I'm not going to any assisted living facility. This is my home, and I'm staying here until the Lord calls me home." There was a long pause. Then Michael's voice turned cold in a way I had never heard before. "Dad, you're being unreasonable. We're trying to help you, but you're being stubborn and selfish." Selfish. The man who had worked 3 jobs to pay for their education was being called selfish for wanting to stay in his own home. "Michael, this house is paid for. I have enough social security and retirement savings to live simply. I'm not asking anything from you or your siblings. I just want to live out my days in the place where your mother and I were happy." "Fine," he said, and his voice was like ice. "But don't expect us to bail you out when things go wrong. Don't call us when you fall and can't get up. Don't expect us to come running when you need help. You're on your own, Dad." The line went dead. Over the next few weeks, the other children called to deliver similar ultimatums. Sarah was the most emotional about it, crying as she told me I was making things so difficult for everyone. David was clinical, explaining the liability issues of my decision. Rebecca was the most hurtful. She simply said I was choosing a house over my own family. But that wasn't what I was choosing. I was choosing dignity over convenience. I was choosing to maintain some control over my own life, instead of letting them warehouse me somewhere out of sight and out of mind. The months that followed were the loneliest of my life. The phone stopped ringing altogether. No more Sunday calls, no more requests for loans or babysitting or emotional support. I had called their bluff, and they had responded by cutting me out of their lives completely. My health continued to decline. The arthritis made simple tasks painful, and I had 2 more minor heart episodes. Each time I drove myself to the hospital, sat in the emergency room alone and drove myself home to an empty house. I hired a teenager from down the street to help with the lawn and basic maintenance. Mrs. Patterson from next door would sometimes bring me casseroles when she noticed I hadn't been out of the house for several days. The mailman, Carlos, would check on me if packages piled up on the porch. Strangers were showing me more kindness than my own children. I started attending church more regularly, not just for Sunday service, but for Wednesday night Bible study and Saturday morning prayer meetings. Pastor Williams and Eleanor continued to include me in their lives, but I could see the pity in their eyes when they looked at me. The old man whose children had abandoned him. One Sunday, during a sermon about the prodigal son, I found myself crying. But I wasn't the father in that story. I was the prodigal, and I didn't know how to find my way home. After church, Eleanor took my arm gently. "Samuel, honey, you know that story isn't just about children who leave, don't you? Sometimes we're all prodigals in one way or another. Sometimes we have to lose everything we think we want before we can find everything we really need." Her words stuck with me, but I wasn't ready to hear their full meaning yet. The breaking point came on my 74th birthday. For 73 years, my birthday had been a celebration. Martha would make my favorite chocolate cake. The children would call with silly songs and promises to visit soon. Even after Martha died, the children had continued the tradition. But on my 74th birthday, the phone didn't ring once. I sat in the kitchen, where Martha used to surprise me with birthday breakfasts, and I realized that to my children, I was already dead. They had performed their own funeral for me the day I refused to comply with their plans. That night, I did something I had never done in my entire life. I got drunk. I found a bottle of whiskey that someone had given Martha and me for our 40th wedding anniversary, and I drank until the pain in my chest felt more like numbness. I drank until I couldn't remember what my children's voices sounded like. I drank until I passed out in Martha's rocking chair. When I woke up the next morning, hungover and ashamed, I found myself praying for the first time in months. God, I don't understand what's happening to me. I tried to be a good father, a good husband, a good man. I followed all the rules. I sacrificed everything for my family, and now I'm alone, forgotten, unwanted. Did I do something wrong? Did I fail somewhere? I wasn't expecting an answer, but sitting there in the morning light streaming through Martha's lace curtains, I heard a voice as clear as if someone had spoken aloud. Samuel, you've been trying to earn love instead of receiving it. That voice changed everything. I spent the next few days reading my Bible with new eyes, particularly the stories about God's love for the outcasts, the rejected, the forgotten. I read about how Jesus spent time with the people society had thrown away. I read about how God adopts us as his children when earthly families fail us. Slowly, I began to understand that my worth wasn't determined by whether my children wanted me. My value wasn't measured by how useful I was to other people. I was beloved by the Creator of the universe, and that was enough. But understanding something intellectually and living it emotionally are two different things. The real transformation began 3 months later, on what started as the worst day of my life. I had been having chest pains for several days but had been ignoring them. When you're alone and getting older, you start to accept that every day might be your last, and sometimes that feels more like relief than fear. But on this particular Tuesday morning, the pain became unbearable. I called 911, and as I waited for the ambulance, I realized I had no one to call. No family member who would care that I was being rushed to the hospital. No one who would miss me if I didn't come home. At the hospital, they ran tests and determined that I was having a serious cardiac event. They needed to keep me for observation, possibly surgery. When the nurse asked for my emergency contact, I had to tell her there wasn't one. She looked at me with such compassion that I almost started crying right there in the emergency room. Mr. Samuel, surely there's someone we can call. A child, a sibling, a close friend. I just shook my head. At 74 years old, I was completely alone in the world. They admitted me to the cardiac unit, and for 3 days I lay in that hospital bed watching other patients receive visitors, flowers, get-well cards. My room remained empty, except for the nurses who checked on me with professional kindness. On the 3rd day, something unexpected happened. I was dozing when I heard a soft knock on my door. I opened my eyes to see a young man I didn't recognize standing in the doorway with a small bouquet of wildflowers. Mr. Samuel, my name is Marcus. I'm from Faith Community Church. Pastor Williams asked me to come check on you. Marcus looked to be in his early 30s, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. He pulled up a chair next to my bed and sat down like he had all the time in the world. Pastor Williams mentioned that you've been going through a difficult time, he said. I wanted you to know that you're not alone. For the next hour, Marcus sat with me and listened as I told him my story. Not just the recent rejection by my children, but everything. My childhood, my marriage to Martha, the years of sacrifice, the gradual realization that the family I had built didn't really want me anymore. Marcus didn't try to fix anything or offer easy answers. He just listened with the kind of attention I hadn't experienced in years. When I finished talking, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that would change my life forever. Mr. Samuel, I want to tell you something that might sound strange, but I believe God sent me to you today. Not just to visit, but to invite you into something beautiful. Our church has a program called Adopted Grandfathers. We have dozens of young families whose children have never had grandparents in their lives, and we have older men like yourself who have so much love and wisdom to share. He leaned forward, his eyes bright with excitement. What if I told you that there are children in our community who are praying for a grandfather? Kids who need someone to teach them how to fish, how to fix things, how to tell stories about the old days. Families who would welcome you not as a burden, but as a blessing. I stared at him, hardly able to process what he was saying. After months of feeling unwanted and useless, this young man was suggesting that there were people who actually needed me. But I don't know anything about being someone else's grandfather, I protested weakly. Marcus smiled. Mr. Samuel, you raised 4 children. You know more about being a grandfather than you think. The difference is, these families will appreciate what you have to offer. They'll see your wisdom as a gift, not your age as a burden. Before he left that day, Marcus prayed with me. Not a formal religious prayer, but a simple conversation with God that felt like he was talking to a beloved friend. He thanked God for my life, for my experiences, for the love I had to share. He asked God to heal my heart, both physically and emotionally. When he finished praying, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. Marcus visited me every day for the rest of my hospital stay. Sometimes he brought other people from the church. Eleanor came with homemade cookies, Pastor Williams brought books, and a woman named Rosa brought her guitar and sang hymns in my room. But it was what Marcus told me on my last day in the hospital that really opened my eyes to what God was doing in my life. Mr. Samuel, I have a confession to make. I wasn't just randomly assigned to visit you. I specifically asked Pastor Williams if I could be the one to come see you. Why? I asked. Marcus's eyes filled with tears. Because I lost my grandfather when I was 8 years old, and I've been praying for years that God would bring a grandfather figure into my life. When Pastor Williams told us about your situation, I knew God was answering my prayers. Here I was, feeling like God had forgotten about me, and he was using my pain to answer someone else's prayers. More than that, he was using someone else's need to heal my pain. Mr. Samuel, Marcus continued, I'm married to a wonderful woman named Lisa, and we have 2 children, Emma, who's 6, and little Joshua, who's 4. They've never had a grandfather, and I've never had anyone to teach me how to be the kind of father I want to be. He paused, then asked the question that would change everything. Would you consider letting us adopt you as our family's grandfather? I couldn't speak. After months of my own children rejecting me, this young man wanted to choose me as family. When I was finally able to find my voice, I said, Son, I think I'd like that very much. Marcus picked me up from the hospital in his pickup truck, and instead of taking me home to my empty house, he drove me to his modest home across town. When we pulled into the driveway, I saw a banner stretched across the front porch that read, Welcome home, Grandpa Samuel. Lisa came out of the house carrying little Joshua, with Emma holding her hand. Emma ran straight to the truck and pressed her face against the window, grinning at me with a gap-toothed smile. Are you really going to be our grandpa? She asked as I got out of the truck. If you'll have me, I said, my voice shaking with emotion. Emma threw her arms around my legs and hugged me tight. I've been praying for a grandpa forever and ever. Little Joshua was shy at first, peeking at me from behind his mother's legs, but when I knelt down to his level and asked him if he wanted to help me learn how to be a good grandpa, he nodded solemnly and took my hand. Lisa had prepared a welcome dinner, nothing fancy, just spaghetti and meatballs, but it was the first time in months that I had eaten a meal with a family. As we sat around their kitchen table, Emma chattering about school and Joshua showing me his toy trucks, I realized something profound. This felt more like family than anything I had experienced with my own children in years. That night, Marcus and Lisa offered to let me stay in their spare room. But I wasn't ready for that big of a step yet. I went home to my house, but for the first time in months, I didn't feel alone. I had somewhere to go tomorrow. I had people who wanted to see me. The next few weeks were like learning to live again. Marcus would pick me up every Sunday for church, and afterward their family would come to my house for dinner. I taught Emma how to tend Martha's garden, and she would chatter away about everything she was learning in school. Joshua would sit on my lap while I read him stories, the same ones I had read to my own children decades earlier. But the most healing moments came with Marcus himself. This young man, hungry for wisdom and guidance, would ask me questions about marriage, parenting, faith, and life that my own sons had never bothered to ask. He wanted to know how I had managed to stay married to Martha for 47 years. He wanted advice on disciplining children with love. He wanted to understand how to balance work and family. For the first time in years, I felt valuable. Not just useful, but valued. Marcus didn't see me as a burden or an inconvenience. He saw me as a treasure trove of experience and wisdom. One evening, as we sat on my front porch watching Emma and Joshua chase fireflies in the yard, Marcus said something that brought tears to my eyes. Mr. Samuel, I want you to know that having you in our lives has been an answer to prayers I didn't even know how to pray. Emma has never been so happy. Joshua is learning things I never could have taught him, and Lisa says you've brought a peace to our home that wasn't there before." He paused, watching his children play. "But more than that, you've taught me how to be a better husband and father. Just watching how you treat people, how you listen, how you love without expecting anything in return, you've shown me what it looks like to be a godly man." I had to wipe my eyes before I could respond. "Son, you've given me something I didn't think I'd ever have again, a family that wants me." But God wasn't finished with his restoration work in my life. A few months later, Marcus approached me with another proposal. The church's Adopted Grandfathers program was growing, and they needed someone to help coordinate it. They wanted me to be the one to match elderly men with families, to train new grandfathers, and to provide ongoing support for these relationships. "Mr. Samuel, you understand better than anyone what it feels like to be unwanted, and now you understand what it feels like to be chosen. You're the perfect person to help other men through this transition." I accepted the position, and suddenly my life had purpose again. Every week I would meet with elderly men who had been abandoned by their families, rejected by their children, forgotten by the world. I would tell them my story, and I would watch hope return to their eyes. There was Robert, 78, whose son had put him in a nursing home and never visited. I matched him with the Johnson family, and now he teaches their twin boys how to build birdhouses every Saturday. There was William, 71, whose daughter lived 2 miles away but hadn't spoken to him in 3 years over some long-forgotten argument. I introduced him to the Martinez family, and now he's teaching their teenage daughter how to speak English while she teaches him Spanish. There was Frank, 69, who had been living in his car after his children sold his house and kept the money. The Peterson family not only welcomed him as their grandfather, but helped him find a small apartment nearby. Story after story of rejection transformed into acceptance, pain transformed into purpose, loneliness transformed into love. But the most profound change was happening in my own heart. As I watched God use my pain to heal others, I began to understand that my children's rejection hadn't been the end of my story. It had been the beginning of a new chapter. One Sunday morning, exactly 1 year after Marcus first visited me in the hospital, Pastor Williams asked me to share my testimony with the entire congregation. I was nervous. I had never spoken in front of so many people, but I felt God calling me to be transparent about his goodness. I stood at that podium and looked out at hundreds of faces, many of them families I had helped connect with adopted grandfathers. In the third row I saw Marcus, Lisa, Emma and Joshua, my chosen family, beaming up at me with pride and love. I told them my story, all of it. The years of sacrifice, the gradual rejection, the loneliness, the despair, and then the miracle of being chosen by God's family when my birth family had cast me aside. When I finished speaking, something beautiful happened. The entire congregation stood up and applauded, but it wasn't just polite church applause. People were crying, hugging each other, and I could see that my story had touched something deep in many hearts. After the service, I was surrounded by people sharing their own stories of rejection and redemption, adult children who realized they had been taking their parents for granted, elderly people who had felt forgotten but now saw possibilities for new relationships, young families who wanted to open their homes to adoptive grandparents. But the conversation that meant the most to me came from a woman I didn't recognize. "Mr. Samuel," she said, approaching me with tears in her eyes, "my name is Patricia, and I'm visiting from California. I came here today because I think I might be one of your children." My heart stopped. For a moment, I thought she meant she was literally one of my children, somehow disguised or unrecognizable. But then she continued, "My father is 76 years old, and my siblings and I have been pressuring him to sell his house and move to assisted living. We've been treating him exactly the way you described your children treating you. We thought we were being practical, but after hearing your story, I realize we've been being selfish." She wiped her eyes. "I'm flying home tonight, and the first thing I'm going to do is apologize to my father and ask him what he really wants, not what's most convenient for us." That conversation reminded me that God wasn't just healing my heart. He was using my story to prevent other families from making the same mistakes mine had made. Over the next few months, I received letters from adult children all over the country who had heard about my testimony through word of mouth or social media. They wrote to thank me for opening their eyes to how they were treating their elderly parents. Many of them were able to repair relationships before it was too late. But God had one more surprise in store for me. 2 years after I had started coordinating the Adopted Grandfathers program, I received a phone call that I never expected. "Dad, it's Sarah." I almost dropped the phone. I hadn't heard from any of my children in over 3 years. My first instinct was anger. Where had she been when I was dying in the hospital? Where had she been when I was sitting alone on my birthdays? But then I heard something in her voice that made me pause. She was crying. "Dad, I need to tell you something. I've been following what you're doing at the church. Someone sent me a video of your testimony and I can't stop watching it. I can't stop thinking about what we did to you." She paused, struggling to find words. "Dad, we were wrong, so wrong. We treated you like a problem instead of our father. We were so worried about our own convenience that we forgot about your heart. And I'm so sorry." I sat in Martha's old rocking chair, holding the phone with shaking hands, not sure how to respond. Part of me wanted to hang up. Part of me wanted to tell her it was too late, that she had made her choice. But then I heard the voice that had guided me through my darkest moments. "Samuel, you've learned how to receive love. Now learn how to extend forgiveness." "Sarah," I said softly, "what made you call today?" "My daughter Emma, your granddaughter that you've barely gotten to know. She's been asking about you. She's doing a project at school about family history. And when I tried to tell her about her grandfather, I realized I didn't know anything about your life anymore. I didn't know if you were happy or healthy or even alive." She sobbed into the phone. "Dad, I watched that video of you talking about how Marcus's children have never had a grandfather. And I realized that my children have a grandfather they don't know because I was too selfish and proud to maintain a relationship with you." The conversation that followed was painful and healing at the same time. Sarah told me that she had been carrying guilt about me for years, but had been too proud to reach out. She had convinced herself that I was probably fine, that I preferred being alone, that I had chosen my house over my family. Hearing my testimony had shattered those comfortable lies. She realized that I hadn't chosen a house over family. I had chosen dignity over being discarded. "Dad, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but is there any chance you could forgive me? Is there any possibility that we could try again?" I thought about everything God had taught me over the past 3 years, about how His love isn't conditional on our performance, about how He forgives us before we even ask, about how His family welcomes prodigals with open arms. "Sarah, sweetheart, of course I forgive you, but I need you to understand something. I'm not the same man I was 3 years ago. I'm not going to beg for your attention or try to earn your love anymore. I've learned that I'm valuable because God says I'm valuable, not because of what I can do for other people. I know, Dad, and I respect that. I'm not calling because I want something from you. I'm calling because I want to know you, the real you, the man who's been building a ministry out of his own pain, who's been fathering other people's children while his own children ignored him." We talked for 2 hours that day. Sarah told me about her marriage, her children, her struggles and fears. But more than that, she asked me questions about my life now. She wanted to know about Marcus and his family, about the church program, about how I had found purpose after such deep rejection. At the end of the conversation, she asked if she could come visit. Not to try to convince me to move or change my life, but just to see me, to let her children meet their grandfather properly, to try to build a relationship based on respect rather than obligation. I said yes. Sarah's visit 3 weeks later was awkward at first. She brought her husband Tom and their 2 children, Emma, now 14, and David, 12. These grandchildren barely knew me, and I barely knew them. But something beautiful happened when Marcus's family stopped by that evening. Emma and Joshua, now 8 and 6, ran to me with the easy affection of children who had never doubted their place in my heart. They climbed on my lap, chatted about their day, and treated me with the natural love of grandchildren who had never experienced rejection. I watched Sarah's face as she observed this interaction. She saw what she had robbed her own children of, a relationship with their grandfather. More importantly, she saw what she had robbed me of, the joy of being a beloved grandfather. But she also saw something else. She saw that I was happy, genuinely, deeply happy in a way I had never been, when I was desperately trying to earn my children's approval. "Dad," she said later that evening, after Marcus's family had gone home, "you seem different, more at peace than I remember you ever being." "I am at peace," I told her. "For the first time in my life I understand what it means to be loved unconditionally. Not by people who love me because of what I can do for them, but by people who love me just because I exist." Over the following months, Sarah and I slowly rebuilt our relationship. But it was different this time. She didn't expect me to drop everything for her needs. She didn't treat me like a convenient solution to her problems. She approached me as an adult child, seeking to know her father, not as someone trying to manage an elderly relative. The most healing moment came 6 months later, when Sarah called to ask if she could bring her family to church with me. "Dad, I want my children to see what you've built. I want them to meet Marcus and Lisa and the kids. I want them to understand that their grandfather didn't just survive being rejected by his family. He thrived by building a new one." That Sunday morning, I sat in the church pew with both of my families. On one side, Marcus, Lisa, Emma, and Joshua, the family that had chosen me when I was broken and forgotten. On the other side, Sarah, Tom, Emma, and David, part of the family that was learning to love me again. During the service, Pastor Williams announced that the Adopted Grandfathers program had matched over 100 families in the past 2 years, and he asked me to stand for recognition. As the congregation applauded, I looked at my 2 families and realized that God had given me something I never could have imagined, a legacy built on love rather than obligation. After church, both families came back to my house for dinner. I watched Marcus's children and Sarah's children playing together in Martha's garden. I listened to Sarah and Lisa sharing parenting experiences and becoming fast friends. I saw Tom and Marcus bonding over their shared love of baseball, but the moment that brought me to tears came when Sarah pulled me aside. "Dad, I have something to tell you. Tom and I have been talking, and we want to ask if you'd consider moving closer to us. Not into a facility, not because we think you can't take care of yourself, but because we want you to be part of our daily lives." She paused, then added, "And we want you to continue your ministry with the church. We've already talked to Pastor Williams about helping establish an Adopted Grandfathers program in our city." For the first time in years, I felt wanted by my birth family. Not needed for what I could provide, but wanted for who I was. "Sarah," I said, "I appreciate that offer more than you know, but I'm not ready to leave this place yet. This house still holds too many precious memories of your mother, and Marcus's family still needs me." I saw disappointment flicker across her face, but then she nodded. "I understand, Dad, and I respect your decision, but can we visit more often? Can we be part of your life here?" "I'd like that very much," I said. Over the next year, my relationship with Sarah continued to deepen. She would call me weekly, not because she needed something, but because she wanted to hear my voice. She would visit every few months, and her children began to develop real relationships with me. But more surprisingly, I began to hear from my other children. David called first, then Michael, then Rebecca. Each conversation was painful and healing in its own way. They had all heard about Sarah reconnecting with me, and they had all been wrestling with their own guilt and regret. Not all of them were ready for full reconciliation. Michael was still too proud to admit he had been wrong. Rebecca was too busy with her own life to invest in rebuilding our relationship. But David surprised me by being the most repentant. "Dad, I'm a lawyer. I'm supposed to be good at arguing my case, but I have no defense for how we treated you. We were wrong, morally and ethically wrong, and I want to make it right if you'll let me." David's approach to reconciliation was methodical and thorough, like everything else he did. He researched the Adopted Grandfathers program and helped me incorporate it as a non-profit organization. He provided legal services for free to help other elderly men who were being financially abused by their adult children. He used his resources to support something that mattered to me. Michael and Rebecca remained distant, but they stopped being hostile. That was enough for me. I had learned that I couldn't force relationships, but I could leave the door open for those who were ready to walk through it. The real test of my healing came 3 years after Sarah's first phone call. I received a call from Michael's wife, Janet, whom I had barely spoken to in years. "Samuel, I need to tell you something. Michael had a massive heart attack yesterday. He's in the ICU and, well, the doctors aren't sure if he's going to make it." My first instinct was to drop everything and rush to the hospital. But then I paused. Michael had made it clear that he didn't want me in his life. Would it be appropriate for me to show up at his most vulnerable moment? I prayed about it, and I felt God calling me to go. Not to force a reconciliation, but to show unconditional love the way he had shown it to me. When I arrived at the hospital, Janet met me in the waiting room with tears in her eyes. "Samuel, thank you for coming. I know things have been difficult between you and Michael, but you're his father, and right now he needs his father." I spent the next 3 days in that hospital waiting room, praying for the son who had rejected me. Sarah and David came to support me, and even Rebecca flew in from New York. For the first time in years, we were all together, not because of a celebration, but because of a crisis. On the 3rd day, Michael's condition stabilized enough for him to have visitors. Janet asked if I wanted to go in first. I found my eldest son lying in that hospital bed, looking older and more fragile than I had ever seen him. When he saw me, tears began streaming down his face. "Dad, you came." "Of course I came, son. You're my boy." "Dad, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. I was so focused on being successful, on building my business, on providing for my family, that I forgot where I came from. I forgot that you sacrificed everything to give me the opportunities I had." He struggled to continue. "When I heard about what you were doing at the church, about how you were helping all those other families, I realized that I had thrown away the most valuable thing I had, a father who knew how to love unconditionally. I took his hand, the same hand I had held when he took his first steps, when he learned to ride a bike, when he graduated from college. Michael, son, I forgive you. I forgave you a long time ago. But how, Dad? How could you forgive us after what we did?" I smiled, thinking about everything God had taught me over the past 5 years. Because I learned that love isn't something you earn or lose based on your performance. Love is something you choose every day, regardless of how the other person responds. Michael squeezed my hand. "Dad, if I get through this, if I get a second chance, I want to do better. I want to be the son you deserved to have. Son, you don't have to earn my love. You already have it. You've had it since the day you were born, and you'll have it until the day I die." Michael made a full recovery, and true to his word, he began working to rebuild our relationship. It wasn't easy or quick. Years of hurt and resentment don't disappear overnight, but we both committed to the process. 6 months after his heart attack, Michael made a decision that surprised everyone. He stepped down as CEO of his company and began working part-time as a business consultant. He wanted to prioritize relationships over success, family over finances. "Dad," he told me during one of our weekly coffee meetings, "I spent so many years chasing after things that don't really matter. I don't want to wake up when I'm your age and realize I missed out on knowing my own father. Today, as I sit in Martha's rocking chair at the age of 79, I can honestly say that I am more blessed than I ever imagined possible. My relationship with Sarah has become deeper and more authentic than it ever was when I was trying to earn her love. David and I have found common ground in our shared commitment to helping other elderly people navigate family conflicts. Even Michael and I are slowly learning how to be father and son again, building on a foundation of grace rather than obligation. Rebecca still keeps her distance, but she sends cards on my birthday and calls occasionally. I pray for her and leave the door open, knowing that healing happens in God's timing, not ours. But perhaps the most beautiful part of my story is watching how God has multiplied the blessing. The Adopted Grandfathers program now operates in 12 cities across 3 states. We've matched over 500 elderly men with families who welcome them not as burdens but as treasures. Marcus's children, now 10 and 8, still call me Grandpa Samuel and spend every Sunday afternoon at my house. They've brought friends from school who don't have grandfathers, and gradually My small house has become a gathering place for children who hunger for the wisdom and love that only an elder can provide. But the real miracle isn't in the numbers or the programs or even in the reconciliation with some of my biological children. The real miracle is in my heart. Where there was once bitterness, there is now joy. Where there was once desperation for human approval, there is now confidence in divine love. Where there was once fear of abandonment, there is now certainty of eternal acceptance. I learned that God's love isn't like human love. People love us conditionally, when we're useful, when we're convenient, when we meet their expectations. But God loves us simply because we exist, because He created us, because we are His. I also learned that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes God gives us biological families to teach us about earthly love, but sometimes He gives us chosen families to teach us about heavenly love. Marcus and his family didn't have to choose me. They had no obligation to an elderly stranger. But they chose me anyway, and in doing so they showed me what the love of God looks like in action. To anyone who is listening to this story and feeling rejected, abandoned, or forgotten, I want you to hear this. Your worth is not determined by whether other people recognize your value. You are precious in the sight of God, and He has plans for your life that are bigger and more beautiful than anything you can imagine. Your rejection might feel like the end of your story, but it might actually be the beginning of your greatest chapter. God specializes in taking broken things and making them beautiful, in taking rejected stones and making them cornerstones, in taking forgotten people and making them unforgettable. If you're an elderly person whose family has cast you aside, know that God sees you. He values your wisdom, your experience, your capacity to love. There are people in this world who need exactly what you have to offer. Don't give up. Don't withdraw. Let God use your pain to heal others, and watch how He heals you in the process. If you're an adult child who has been neglecting or mistreating your elderly parents, it's not too late. Pride is expensive, but forgiveness is free. Your parents won't be here forever, and you don't want to live with regret when they're gone. Pick up the phone. Make the visit. Have the conversation. You might discover that the person you've been avoiding is exactly the person you need in your life. And if you're a young family feeling like you don't have enough support or wisdom in your life, consider opening your hearts to an elderly person who has been discarded by others. You might think you're doing them a favor, but I guarantee they will bless you far more than you bless them. God's family is big enough for all of us. His table has room for the rejected, the forgotten, the cast aside. In His house there are no unwanted children, no burdensome relatives, no inconvenient family members. There is only love, unconditional, unending, unstoppable love. 5 years ago, I thought my story was over. I thought I had nothing left to offer, nowhere left to belong, no purpose left to fulfill. I was wrong on all counts. Today, my calendar is full of meaningful appointments. I have coffee dates with elderly men who are learning to hope again. I have dinner invitations from families who consider me their adopted grandfather. I have speaking engagements where I get to share the good news that rejection is not the end of the story. Today, my phone rings with calls from people who want to hear my voice, not because they need something from me, but because they care about me. I have grandchildren who run to me with joy, who seek my advice, who value my presence in their lives. Today, my house is filled with laughter and love again, not the desperate kind of love that demands reciprocation, but the generous kind of love that flows freely from a heart that has been filled by God's grace. Martha would be amazed to see what God has done with the broken pieces of my life. I think she would be proud to know that her husband didn't just survive rejection, he thrived in acceptance. As I close this story, I want to leave you with the verse that has become my life verse, the one that carried me through my darkest days and continues to guide me in my brightest ones. God sets the lonely in families, He leads out the prisoners with singing, but the rebellious live in a sun-scorched land. Psalm 68:6. God set this lonely old man in a family, multiple families actually. He led me out of the prison of rejection and gave me a song of joy to sing. He took what was meant to harm me and used it to heal others. If you're lonely today, know that God is preparing a family for you. If you're imprisoned by rejection, know that God is planning your release. If you're living in the sun-scorched land of abandonment, know that God is preparing an oasis of acceptance. Your story isn't over. In fact, the best chapters might be yet to come. Trust the author of your story. He knows how to write beautiful endings, even when the middle chapters are painful. And remember, you are loved, you are chosen, you are wanted by the one whose opinion matters most. May God bless you. May He open your eyes to see the family He has prepared for you, and may He use your story to heal others, just as He used mine. Thank you for letting me share my heart with you today. Until we meet again, this is Grandpa Samuel, reminding you that you are never too old, never too forgotten, and never too rejected to be used mightily by God. He's not finished with you yet.